The Halloween Podcast presents Double Vision, an episodic thriller about a down-on-his-luck 26-year-old named Mason Carter who begins to see the world differently after one too many drinks. When the alcohol hits, Mason doesn't just see double, he sees them, twisted, demonic versions of the people around him. At first, he thinks it's just another drunken hallucination, until the doubles begin to act on their own. Set in the quiet Midwestern town of Grayford, Double Vision follows Mason as he uncovers a terrifying truth. The doubles are real. They're parasites, demonic entities trying to merge with their human hosts and tear through the veil separating their world from ours. Join Mason on his journey as he teams up with his sharp-tongued girlfriend Natalie and his reckless best friend Dylan. Armed with a mysterious mail-order Demon Slayer deluxe kit, the trio must battle back the invasion before the merging is complete, and humanity is lost. But with every step forward, Mason's own double creeps closer. This is Double Vision, a horror story about addiction, identity, and what waits behind your reflection when no one else is watching. Let's begin. Chapter 1: The Same Damn Town. Mason Carter stared at the faded wallpaper in the living room. Beige with a floral pattern that hadn't been trendy since his grandma's generation. The kind of wallpaper that smelled like old dust and cigarette smoke no matter how many times you wiped it down. He was still in his boxers, sprawled out on the second-hand couch, eating cereal straight from the box. Not even the good kind. The knockoff sugar puffs that turned soggy the moment milk touched them. A bottle of cheap beer sweated on the coffee table next to an empty ramen cup and a remote that only worked if you hit it just right. The sound of a hairdryer buzzed through the thin walls, muffled by a closed door.
"Did you call about that job at the mill?"
Came a voice, sharp, familiar, and full of the kind of love that sounded like disappointment. Mason didn't answer right away. He stuffed another handful of cereal into his mouth and chewed slowly, eyes fixed on the silent TV. Some daytime courtroom show flickered across the screen, people yelling about whose baby was whose, like that mattered in the grand scheme of things. The bathroom door creaked open and Natalie stepped out. Her long, dark hair pulled up into a messy bun, still damp at the edges. She was wearing the same scrubs she wore every day, light blue, stained from work, and a little faded at the knees.
"Mason."
Her tone was flat.
"Did you call?"
He sighed.
"I'll call today, I swear."
"You said that yesterday."
Yesterday I was gonna, but then the truck...
"Nope. Don't you start with that truck needs a new battery crap again. Your truck's been dead for 2 months. You could have walked."
He didn't respond, mostly because she was right. Natalie crossed the room, grabbed her keys from the hook by the door, and slung her purse over her shoulder. She hesitated before leaving, her hand on the knob.
"I love you,"
she said, not looking at him.
I love you too.
Mason replied, the words automatic and dry. The door clicked shut behind her. The silence after she left was heavy. Mason leaned back and rubbed his eyes. The town of Grayford had a way of sucking the ambition right out of you. A town with more closed storefronts than open ones, where the diner still had a payphone out front and people still talked about the state championship game from '95 like it just happened. He didn't hate Natalie, not even a little. She was the only good thing left in his life. But every time she asked him to do better, he felt like a man standing at the bottom of a well, being yelled at to climb out without a rope. He knew he wasn't living right, wasn't who he was supposed to be. But the truth was, Mason didn't know who that guy was supposed to be anymore. He reached for the beer, popped the cap off, and took a long drink. It was 10:43 a.m. The beer was halfway gone when a loud knock hit the front door. Sharp and urgent, like a cop or a salesman. Mason froze for a second. Then the knock came again, this time followed by a voice he knew too well.
Yo, open up, man. I know you're in there. Your truck's still parked like a dead roach on the curb.
Mason groaned, hauled himself off the couch, and opened the door. There stood Dylan Knox, 5'11" of bad decisions in a faded leather jacket. His grin was too wide, his sunglasses were too dark, and his breath already carried the faint scent of something stronger than coffee.
Dude,
Dylan said, stepping in without waiting for an invite.
you look like someone just told you Halloween got canceled.
Mason shut the door behind him.
What do you want?
What? I can't visit my best friend anymore.
Dylan flopped onto the recliner like it owed him money.
Nah, I came by 'cause I got something for us.
Mason raised an eyebrow.
Us?
Dylan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a flask.
Figured we'd start the day right.
It's Tuesday.
Even better. We'll beat the weekend rush.
Mason stared at the flask for a long second. He should have said no. Should have told Dylan to get lost, to grow up, to stop showing up with excuses and alcohol like they were still 19. But instead, he took the flask. Just a sip, just to take the edge off. Dylan grinned again, satisfied.
That's the Mason I know.
They sat in silence for a while, trading the flask back and forth, watching the TV play a rerun of a cooking show no one was actually paying attention to.
I saw Natalie at the clinic this morning.
Dylan finally said.
She looked pissed.
She's tired of me.
Mason muttered.
She's tired of life.
Dylan said, waving it off.
Look, man, this town's a black hole. Everyone ends up like their parents or worse. You think Natalie's gonna ride off into the sunset? Hell no. She'll be here in 20 years with 3 kids, same scrubs, same bills, same everything. You and me, though.
He leaned forward like he was about to share a secret.
We could still get out. Start something. I got a guy who's looking for help moving stuff. Easy money.
Mason looked at him.
Moving what?
Dylan shrugged.
Stuff. Furniture. Maybe other things. Don't ask too many questions and the pay stays good.
Mason took another sip. His stomach turned, whether from the booze or the thought of turning into Dylan, he couldn't tell.
You're gonna get yourself killed,
he said. Dylan laughed.
Probably. But I'll die free.
The room fell quiet again. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, and somewhere down the street, a lawnmower sputtered to life. Mason leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Same town, same couch, same damn everything. But something was shifting. Just a little. The next sip tasted different. Like something waiting just out of sight was finally starting to notice him. They sat watching a cooking show neither of them was paying attention to, the flask passing back and forth without much conversation. Mason had just taken another slow sip when the TV flickered, a momentary static pulse that cut out the cheerful sounds of sizzling pans and upbeat music. Then, like a relic from a bygone era of bad cable, a new image snapped onto the screen. A man wearing a velvet red suit with gold trim stood in front of a massive set piece that looked like a cardboard castle with flame decals taped to the sides. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes were just a little too wide as he threw his arms out like a magician.
Are demons ruining your life?
He shouted, smiling at the camera.
Are your dreams haunted? Is your toaster possessed? Then you need the Demon Slayer Deluxe.
Dylan sat up.
Oh man, this looks promising.
The man on screen was joined by a woman dressed in a fake priest outfit complete with a rhinestone-covered collar. She held up a comically large wooden stake painted neon orange.
With our patented 3-step method,
She said,
you'll banish unholy terrors, real or imaginary, using nothing but this kit, blessed salt packets, demon-scented candles, and the power of belief.
The screen shifted to a series of dramatizations. A guy in pajamas being chased by a man in a dollar store devil costume. A close-up of someone dramatically sprinkling salt over a pentagram rug, and a family smiling peacefully as they sat beside a flickering candle labeled Sense of Salvation.
Call now and you'll receive our limited edition glow-in-the-dark charm bracelet. Not sold in stores.
Mason blinked at the screen.
Is this a joke?
I think it's a cult recruitment video.
Dylan said, eyes glued to the spectacle. The infomercial continued. Sound effects, strobe flashes, a woman pretending to be possessed and spinning in a cheap office chair while dramatic music swelled beneath her. At the bottom of the screen, a 1-800 number pulsed in red letters. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was gone. The cooking show resumed as if nothing had happened. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Dylan let out a laugh.
That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
Mason chuckled too, though his mouth still burned slightly from the last swig of whatever was in that flask. It hadn't gone down smooth. It felt like it had clawed its way through his throat and left something behind.
I'm gonna hit the head.
Mason said, standing a little too fast. The floor shifted under him like a boat on water, and he grabbed the back of the couch to steady himself.
Seeing double already.
Don't piss on your own shoes.
Dylan called out, still laughing. Mason made his way to the bathroom, the hallway seeming longer than it should have been. He pushed open the door, flicked on the light, and stared at his reflection in the mirror for a moment. He looked pale, tired, maybe even a little sick. His eyes were bloodshot, and his shirt clung to his back from the sweat starting to form. He took care of business, then turned on the sink and splashed cold water on his face. The coolness helped a little, but something was still off. The back of his throat tingled, and there was an odd taste on his tongue, metallic and bitter, like the aftertaste of chewing on a coin. Wiping his face with a hand towel, Mason looked up. His breath caught. There, staring back at him from the mirror, was a second reflection. It was him, but not quite. Slightly off-center, like a double exposure. The second Mason was darker, the shadows clinging to his face a little too long, the smirk curling his lips too wide. His eyes were wrong. They looked hollow, bottomless, like something was staring out from behind them. Mason didn't move. Neither did the second reflection. Then, just slightly out of sync, the second version tilted its head, almost curious. Mason stumbled backward, knocking into the towel rack as a sharp chill rolled through his chest. His heart raced as he turned back toward the mirror. Only one reflection. Just him. He stood there for a long moment, gripping the edge of the sink, trying to steady his breathing. In the other room, Dylan laughed at something the cooking show host said, completely unaware. Mason stared at himself in the mirror. That second version hadn't felt like a drunken hallucination. It had felt like something looking back. Chapter 2. Something in the Glass. Mason sat on the edge of the bathtub staring at the tile floor like it might give him an answer. His stomach churned, though whether it was from the booze or what he'd just seen in the mirror, he couldn't say. It wasn't the usual kind of drunk, not hazy or loose, not even dizzy in the right way. There was a sharpness to it, like his body was drunk, but something in his mind was more awake than usual. Too awake. like it had caught a frequency it wasn't supposed to hear. He stood slowly, bracing himself against the wall. The mirror still showed only one Mason, but he didn't trust it anymore. There was something about the way that second version had looked at him. Not dazed, not panicked, amused. Like it knew something he didn't. Mason splashed more water on his face and stepped out into the hallway. Dylan was still on the couch, flipping through channels like his life depended on it. The flask rested on the coffee table, untouched since Mason walked away.
You all right?
Dylan asked, not looking up.
Yeah,
Mason lied.
just hit me harder than I thought.
Dylan chuckled.
Told you, man. It's good stuff. Not that watered-down gas station garbage.
Mason didn't ask where he got it. He didn't want to know. He collapsed back onto the couch, sinking into the cushion like it might swallow him. The TV flashed with more daytime nonsense. An old sitcom with laugh tracks that sounded like screams if you listen long enough.
You ever
Mason hesitated, eyes still fixed on the screen.
see things when you drink too much?
Dylan laughed.
You mean like unicorns, leprechauns, naked exes?
I'm serious.
Dylan finally looked at him. His expression shifted slightly, just for a second, but it was enough to make Mason sit up straighter.
What did you see?
Mason shook his head.
Nothing. Doesn't matter.
You're full of crap. Spill it.
Mason hesitated.
I looked in the mirror and saw another me. Like a second version, but it wasn't doing the same thing I was. It looked wrong.
Dylan gave a low whistle.
Damn. Maybe there is something in that flask.
Mason wasn't laughing.
You ever heard of that happening?
To you, no. But I've heard people say stuff like that. Hallucinations, bad trips, booze that's cut with something weird. Could be anything.
Yeah,
Mason said quietly.
could be.
But it didn't feel like a hallucination. It had felt real. Later that afternoon, Mason found himself walking down Main Street, squinting against the sun. He had told Dylan he needed fresh air, but the truth was he couldn't stand sitting in that house any longer. Something about the walls felt tighter now, like they were closing in. Grayford's downtown was a few blocks long, a mix of old brick buildings, mom-and-pop shops that barely stayed open, and sidewalks cracked from decades of neglect. The pharmacy still had a cigarette machine inside, and the grocery store only carried one brand of cereal. People passed him. Familiar faces he barely registered anymore. Neighbors, kids he went to high school with, people who'd never left, just like him. But now every glance felt like it lasted too long. Every pair of eyes lingered. He stopped in front of the pawn shop and leaned against the front window, pretending to look at the faded guitars and cracked jewelry in the display. And then he saw it again. Across the street, standing beside a mail drop box, was Mr. Jenkins, the retired history teacher, in his tan cardigan and loafers, always with a smile and a tip of his hat. But today, there were two of him. One stood just like always, slow, tired, soft around the edges. The second stood just behind him, darker, leaner, sharper. His face looked the same, but the expression was off. The mouth was curled in a tight, sneering grin. The eyes, even from across the street, were fixed on Mason like they knew. And then the second Jenkins moved. Only a fraction of a step, just enough to unnerve. The real Jenkins blinked and turned to head inside the post office. The second one didn't follow. He stood still, watching Mason until he blinked. Then he was gone. Mason backed away from the glass. His heart was pounding, his palms slick. He swallowed hard and turned toward home, walking faster than before, trying to keep his eyes forward and not look too long at anyone else on the street. not until he figured out what the hell was happening. Mason didn't look back as he crossed the street and turned down Ashwood Avenue. His head throbbed with a pulsing ache that felt too deep for a hangover. Every sound was sharper than it should have been. The buzz of cicadas, the distant bark of a dog, the crunch of gravel under his boots. He was halfway down the block when he heard it.
Hey, Mason.
He flinched, stopping mid-step. The voice was unmistakable, loud, nasal, and full of the kind of forced cheer that grated like sandpaper. Mason closed his eyes for a second before turning around. Across the street, hustling toward him with a clipboard and a half-eaten sandwich in hand, came Todd Bailey. Todd had been in the same graduating class as Mason, but you'd never know it the way he carried himself, like the guy had been born middle-aged. He was stocky, with a round, red face that always looked like it had just finished yelling. He worked the floor at the Grayford Mill and had recently been promoted to shift manager, a title he wore like a sheriff's badge.
Mason, man, I've been trying to catch you for a week.
Todd said, wiping mustard off his chin with the back of his hand.
You gonna call about that position or what?
Mason took a breath, trying to stay calm.
Not today, Todd.
Oh, come on.
Todd said, stepping in front of him like a mall cop on a mission.
They're hiring right now. You'd probably get placed same day if you'd just show up and fill out the damn form. Benefits kicked in 2 months ago, too. Dental even. That's not nothing.
I said not today.
Yeah, but you keep saying that, and I keep seeing you just walking around town like you're on vacation or something. You know they think you don't want the work? I'm the one sticking my neck out for you.
Mason's jaw clenched. Behind Todd, a woman walked by with a stroller, and Mason's eyes instinctively flicked toward her. She looked normal. No double, no shadow self. He looked back at Todd, whose red face was flushed even deeper now, maybe from the heat or from frustration.
Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk,
Todd continued, voice rising slightly.
I know Natalie's been pushing you. People are starting to talk, man, saying you're...
I said no.
Mason snapped, louder than he meant to.
Just leave it, Todd. All right?
Todd stepped back like he'd been shoved.
Jesus, man, I'm just trying to help.
I didn't ask for your help.
Mason muttered, his voice shaking now.
Not from you. Not from anyone. Just let me deal with my own damn life.
For a long second, neither of them moved. Then Todd scoffed and turned, walking away with an angry shake of his head.
Fine. Don't come crying to me when the doors close. But don't expect a call back either. I told them you were serious.
Mason watched him disappear around the corner, heart still pounding in his chest. He knew Todd meant well in his own annoying way, but right now, Mason couldn't handle being prodded. Not with doubles showing up like shadows in the daylight. Not with his reality twisting around him like warm wax. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and turned back toward home, gripping the strap of his worn flannel like it could keep him grounded. So far, only some people had doubles, and Todd didn't. That fact alone made his stomach twist even harder. By the time Mason made it back to his house, the sun was dipping behind the buildings, casting the street in that murky orange light that made everything look more worn out than it already was. His boots hit the porch steps with a sluggish rhythm, and his brain felt wrapped in cotton. The encounter with Todd had rattled him more than he wanted to admit, and the double he'd seen on Mr. Jenkins, that haunted grin and knowing stare, clung to him like cigarette smoke. He opened the front door quietly, hoping to slip in unnoticed, maybe collapse on the couch and let the world disappear for a bit. But the second he stepped inside, he knew he wasn't alone. Natalie's voice cut through the room like a knife.
You've got to be kidding me.
She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, still in her scrubs, the name badge from the clinic swinging slightly as she shifted her weight. Her ponytail was frayed, her eyes dark with exhaustion and irritation. Across from her, leaning casually against the counter like he had every right to be there, was Dylan. He had the flask in one hand, and a smirk he probably thought was charming stretched across his face.
Look who wandered in.
Dylan said without missing a beat.
We were just talking about you.
Natalie's glare flicked from Dylan to Mason.
You left, and the first thing you do is send him back here?
I didn't send him anywhere.
Mason muttered, voice low.
He said you needed a refill.
She threw the words like daggers.
God, Mason, you really want to go down that road again?
Mason looked past her to Dylan, who just shrugged and took another casual sip.
I just dropped by,
Dylan said.
Didn't realize I needed an appointment to see my buddy.
Natalie turned on him.
You're not his buddy. You're the reason he's spiraling.
Oh, come on.
Dylan laughed.
The guy needed a break. This place smells like regret and unpaid bills. I brought him something to take the edge off.
You're poison.
She snapped.
And you don't get to waltz in here like you're helping.
That's enough.
Mason said, stepping between them, not quite shouting, but close. His head was pounding, and that strange hum in the back of his mind was growing again. The one that had started ever since he'd taken that first sip from Dylan's flask. He felt like the floor was shifting under him, like he was being pulled sideways into something just out of reach. Natalie backed off, her hands clenched into fists at her sides.
I'm not doing this again,
she said.
Not with you, and definitely not with him in the picture.
I didn't ask for this.
Mason said, rubbing his face.
I just need, I need some space.
Dylan raised the flask in a mock toast.
To space.
Shut up, Dylan,
Mason snapped. For a beat, everything was still. Just the three of them in that small, suffocating room. The air was thick with something more than tension. Mason couldn't tell if it was the alcohol or the thing it had opened in him, but something wasn't right. The lights felt too dim, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch too far. And in the reflection of the darkened window over the sink, something moved. Something behind him. But when he turned, there was nothing. Thank you for listening to the Halloween Podcast Presents. If you're enjoying these tales of fright, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. If you have any questions, comments, or want to suggest a story idea, send us an email at thehalloweenpodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, head on over to our website, thehalloweenpodcast.com, and pick up some podcast merch. You can also download the entire audiobook now, as well as all our other stories. Join us again next week as we continue our tales. Until next time, this is Lyle Perez saying, have a good night.